Okay, so I thought I would do a build on Shirking Fort versus Shirking Hills. So the first section is going to be applicable whether you are, no matter what build you play. If you're interested in playing Shirking Fort or Shirking Hills, I'm going to go over the pros and cons of each and why I think you, and where I think you should play Shirking Hills, and in what situation and in what builds you should play Shirking Fort. Then I'm going to go over my Shirking Hills build. I've already gone over a Shirking Fort build essentially about a couple of weeks ago, so I'm not going to cover that. I'll put a link in the description to the Shirking Fort build if you want to see that, but I'll cover the Shirking Hills build today. So, okay, so essentially I've been testing Shirking Hills and it basically matches up with the theory crafting. So I'm just going to explain the theory crafting to you so you understand when you would want to use Shirking Hills versus Shirking Fort. So, Shirking Heals is going to give you 100 heals plus 1% of your health. So I've got 13,000 health, so I'm going to get about a 230 heal per item. So if you were to stack 4 items of Shirking Heals, you'd get about a 920 heal every 5 seconds, because there's a 5-second cooldown. Now, Shirking Fort, on the other hand, reduces damage by approximately 16% if you've got 4 items on for 6 seconds. Okay, so bearing that in mind, if you were to take 2 to 3 light attacks in the space of sort of 5 to 6 seconds, that would be approximately 3,000 damage. So Shirking Fort would reduce the damage by about 480. And that's essentially like a heal, right? Because you haven't taken that damage. So you've reduced damage by 480, which is, you know, less than almost half that from the Shirking Heals. So Shirking Heals definitely wins in that situation. Even if you were to take quite a bit of burst damage, so say you were to take about 5 to 6k damage in 5 to 6 seconds, so someone's throwing like a fireball and hits you with an ice spike or something, Shirking Fort would reduce your damage by about 960 if you took 6k damage in 5 seconds, which is basically equivalent to Shirking Heals. So even if you were getting a lot of burst damage, Shirking Heals are still pretty much equivalent to Shirking Fort application. But the problem is that, and this is the problem with every MMO, heals don't scale with damage, whereas damage reduction does. So Shirking Heals won't scale the more damage you're taking, whereas Shirking Fort scales up. So it gets better with the more damage you're taking, right? So if you're in an OPR or a war where you're taking a massive amount of damage from multiple sources, then, and you're getting heals from teammates to just keep you up whilst you're taking that massive damage, Shirking Fortification really starts to come into its own. So if you're taking 10 to 20k damage in 5, if you're taking 10 to 20k damage in 5 seconds, Shirking Fort's going to reduce that damage by about 1600 to 3200. So this is obviously much better than what Shirking Heals can do. So that sort of explains where each armor set is better. If you're going to be dueling, then you're better off using Shirking Heals, much better, because you're going to be getting more heals back than what Shirking Fort can essentially eliminate. If you're, another advantage where I think you'd probably want to use Shirking Heals is if you're an evasive light armor player, where your whole goal is to just avoid taking any damage in the first place. So if you're light armor and you use dodges to avoid a lot of damage, I think in that situation you'd probably make sense to use Shirking Heals, because you're likely to dodge all their attacks and then you'll just get your health back over time. Now, if you're playing like a tank or a bruiser where you're just really in the center of the fight and you can't avoid taking a lot of damage because you're taking AoEs and bow people are hitting at you from range and you're standing in their heels and you're hitting people with your axe and they're hitting you back with their axe, you're going to be taking a large amount of damage. And I think in that situation, that's where Shirking Fort kind of comes into its own. So I think for wars, and if you're playing in the Zerg, I think Shirking Fort makes sense, you know, where you're really just soaking up a lot of that damage. But if you're playing like an OPR and you're just sort of running around the backlines trying to get kill people, and as soon as they turn around you kind of run away, or you're playing like a bow, then I think Shirking Heals makes more sense. Okay, so now I will get into the build. Alright, so Here is my Shirking Heels build. As I mentioned, the Shirking Fortification build I've already done, and that hasn't really changed. So this is my Shirking Heels build if you want to give it a try. And the gear should be like not expensive to get because you can get it from the PvP track. This has sort of been thrown together by the pieces that I've had. You could probably slightly improve it, but the essence is the same, so you can kind of play around with it. So I'm still wearing medium armor because I'm a medium armor bruiser. And obviously Great Axe Warhammer. Okay, so I'll go over each of them. So with my Warhammer, I'm using Shirking Abyss and Sundering Shockwave. That just helps add like additional damage. Shirking Abyss adds a lot of damage every time you dodge to your attacks. So when you land some of your bigger heavy hitting attacks, it's going to be like really big damage, and that's especially helpful when you're dodging in duels, for example, or you're in a fight in OPR and you're dodging their attacks. It means that when you go for your big attacks, they'll do like huge burst damage, which is good. And Sundering Shockwave is just a must-have to have on your weapon because it reduces damage absorption by so much for so long, so it's good. And yeah, at the moment I'm running a Warhammer with Keen on it, although I think you could probably do better, but this is good enough for me. I've been having no problems with it. And then in terms of Great Axe, I'm running Enfeebling Maelstrom. Again, I want to have this on the weapon because it's just really good to have on the weapon. And then Thwarting Strikes and Shirking Flames. And so because I'm running Shirking Flames, I've got I can't remember the name of the gem, but the gem that increases fire damage. And then that synergizes with the jewelry that I've got down here that also increases fire damage. What we've found on our server is often people run like, you know, they've got damage reduction for physical, and so by running a bit more magic damage, you can actually hit them for harder. And so we've done some testing, and if you actually put increase in fire damage, you actually hit harder than if you increase it in strike damage. So at the moment, or at least when we tested it, this seemed to be better, so that's why I'm running it like this. So those are the two weapons, obviously all strength. Okay, in terms of my gear, I'm running Shirking Heels, Refreshing and Resilience. You definitely want to be running, this is the best in slot, you want to be running a Refreshing something. Refreshing Ward is also really, really good, but you want to be running Refreshing something, Shirking Heels and Resilience. You obviously have to have Resilience in every piece, and you're trying to stack Shirking Heels as much as we can, so you want to go Refreshing, Shirking Heels and Resilience. And then I have the heavy chest piece, which is Shirking Heels, Refreshing Ward, and Resilience. I would actually prefer to stack one over the other, so either Refreshing or Refreshing Ward, but it's still better to have a Refreshing something than not having it. And then for my gloves, I've got another Refreshing Ward, Shirking Heels, and Resilience. Now in this build, I've only stacked Shirking Heels 3 times. Because I kind of like Leeching Path of Destiny, which I put on my feet. So this is Resilience, Refreshing, Leeching Path of Destiny. I like it because that's also another big heal that you can get out of it. So I have that on because when you're fighting multiple people and you need a bit of a heal, it can be really clutch. But if you're going to switch it out, I would just switch this out for Shirking Heels if you feel like that's more important. And then for my medium legs, again, I have Insatiable Gravity Well. Now, I know Insatiable Gravity Well has been a bit of a nerf, but if you throw that on people when they're out of stam, or you know, often when people get caught in it, you can get quite a lot of hits off on them as they kind of madly try to escape. So I still think it's really, really good. And again, I've got Refreshing and Resilience. So basically, you want Resilience in every piece. You definitely want Insatiable Gravity Well on one of them, but then you can stack Shirking Heels and everything else, and then you want Refreshing. So something like that or that. Otherwise, if you want to keep Leeching Path of Destiny, then give up. Yeah, you just go 3 stacks of Shirking Heels. Okay, and then the jewelry. I'm running Stamina Recovery. I'm just using the Champion's Amulet. I like Shirking and Power because it increases your damage. Obviously, you want more health, especially because Shirking Heals scales off it. And then Stamina Recovery just really helps in those 1vx situations, or if you've run yourself out of stamina, it gives you a whole bunch of stamina back really quickly that you can carry on dodging. So that's really, really helpful. This isn't the best ring. You definitely can better than this. As I've already mentioned, I just like to stack the fire damage because it increases the damage. I don't need Hardy because I'm in medium armor, so I don't really need the Hardy for the extra dodge. But yeah, so I would actually, this ring should really be replaced with something better, but I'm just using it at the moment. And then this is a good earring. I've got refreshing again, just stacking that refreshing. Refreshing toast obviously reduces the cooldowns on potions, so you can get heals quicker, so that's super important. And then regenerating, which is just more health, right? So that's really, really good. Okay, so, oh, and my resistances, again, you could probably play around with this a little bit, but I've got 7.5% magic resistance, 12.5% slash and thrust resistance, and 7.5% strike resistance. So that's good. This is more kind of my OPR slash war build for dueling, you know, other bruisers especially. You might want to lift that slash up to like 20%. But I just hate having to keep changing things around just for duels, so this is kind of what I run. Yeah, so plus, I mean, the advantage is if you get good at dueling with this against other people that are running like 20-30% slash resistance, then it's like you absolutely clap them when you meet them in the kind of the, in quotations, real world, because they don't have the advantages across you anymore. Okay, and so there's that. I've done the weapons. Usual kind of 300, 200, 300 strength, 200 constitution combo that I'm running with that. And then with the weapon things, I always suck at this, but okay, so I'll try to go through it quickly. I think this is actually a little bit bonkers the way I've set it up. Okay, first of all, I'm a bigger fan of Mauler's Fury for dueling, and I'm a bigger fan of Bloodlust for OPRs. For OPRs, I think Bloodlust is better, especially if you're going to be running around kind of by yourself a little bit, because you can chase those ranged people down. But if you're in an OPR and you're going to stick with the main Zerg, and you're just going to, like, you know, attack anyone that's in the node, but if they leave the node, you just let them go, then Mauler's Fury is way better. It's also way better in wars, and it's better for dueling, so I tend to just leave mine on that. I should really have stacked a little bit extra into here, because obviously you're going to be fighting non-stop against people in bigger numbers, but for some reason I haven't got it on this time. So, yeah, so basically this is my thing for Great Axe. I don't really want to get into it too much. Just, you can just copy that and adjust it as necessary. And I've sort of told you the important stuff, which is this. Yeah. And then Warhammer. This is what I'm running for the Warhammer. Again, you can change that as necessary. If you want to duel against heavy armored people, use Armor Breaker. But, again, I kind of like to use the build that I run in OPRs and Wars so I can get good at it. So, yeah, and I just like the heal from Path of Destiny. And it really helps in 1vx's and also in OPRs and Wars when you just need a big heal. So I keep that on. If you're dueling, though, you're probably better off running Armor Breaker. But, you know, as I've said multiple times, I like to run my War and OPR build so I can get good at that. So, yeah, this is basically the Warhammer. So just, yeah, copy that, essentially. I don't want to go through every skill because it's just kind of like, yeah, painful. Like, this is what I run. If you want an explanation as to why, just go look at my previous video that I did that. Thank you, everyone, for watching the build video. Hopefully that helps, and hopefully the explanation around Shirking heals is good. And I will see you around shortly.